Hello, friends and fellow book lovers. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Page Turners Plus. Today, we have the good fortune to be speaking with Ishi Robinson. She's going to be talking to us about her debut novel, Sweetness in the Skin. Thank you for joining us, Ishi.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much, Paula.
Sweetness in the Skin is a novel about a teenage girl growing up in Jamaica. She is she is kind of on the on a sort of in between places. She is going to a school which is predominantly middle class. She herself comes from a working class background. She has a very difficult relationship with her mother.
hmm
But when I was reading the novel, it felt to me like you were more concerned with issues of classism and colorism than the relationship between the difficult parent-child relationship. Um, was that just me, or what would you say your main concern was?
I think the two are so indelibly intertwined, to be fair. Um, I was focusing a lot on the classism and the colorism because what I wanted to show was how this legacy of colonialism that still exists in Jamaica perpetuates itself in the relationships that exist today. So I think people talk about colonialism very often nowadays as well. People talk about the impact it has and it has had on us as people, but when you really drill down into it, like what does it look like? What does that look like in a family, for example? So for me, this this family was showcasing just it was making it tangible, like what are the effects of this thing that we have been through as people? How are they showing up today? So they're very much intertwined for me. This idea of, you have Cecile, the grandmother, and she has two children, and one is lighter skin, one is darker skin, and Cecile decides she's going to put all of her efforts into the lighter skinned child. Why? It's not because she loves her anymore in particular. It's because it's ingrained in her that the way out of their situation, the way to get their family to a higher status, the way to become better is to put her effort that way. That's what she has learned intrinsically. She probably couldn't even explain it if you asked her. But this is what she sees because this is what we've learned. We learned that to be lighter skin is to be better. That is just what we learn. And it's not about like, it's not even that think you go to school and they teach it. You just absorb it. You just absorb this information. And then you're just doing things and you're not even sure why. So I feel like the relationship is definitely, it's just an example of how it exists and how it shows up in families today and the negative impacts that it's still having on all of us in some way today.
Okay. And sort of linked to that, because of course, the way that Cecile treated her daughters differently, that led to quite a bit of jealousy between the sisters,
hmm
specifically Paulette, I would say. And we noticed that there were several conflicts in the novel that resulted from jealousy. Did you consciously want to address jealousy, or is it just something that kind of showed up as the story developed?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because I never thought of it as jealousy.
Hmm.
I thought of it as pain and
Oh.
hurt.
Mm.
I didn't think that Paulette was jealous of her sister Sophie. I thought she was in pain from a lack of love from her mother. She sees where Cecile, the grandmother, their mother, is, as I said, pouring into Sophie, and there's nothing left for her, for Paulette. And so she's seeing Sophie get all of this, and it hurts. It must hurt. And you don't even really understand why, especially as a child, right? Cecile, I remember Paulette is she's not that she's not that mature herself. She's also young. And in the instance, I was thinking about like where are the instances of jealousy in the novel. If you think about Tamara, for example, when she gets upset that Pumpkin is hanging out with these uptown girls, I also didn't see that as jealousy. I saw that also as pain, as hurt. Like, you're leaving me behind. Like, aren't I good enough?
Hmm.
So I didn't really experience those things as jealousy. For me, it was really about the pain of seeing something that you want but you can't have, of seeing someone who you think you have a certain relationship with, um, but they don't see that relationship that way. So whether that's Tamara and Pumpkin, or whether it's Pumpkin and her own mother, when Pumpkin is looking at Mandy and her friends and where they live, I didn't think she was jealous of how they lived. I thought it made her confused, actually. Is this what I'm supposed to be striving for? I mean, okay, yes, she would have loved to have lived in a nicer house, but it just felt, I feel like it sort of created an identity crisis for her in a way, because Sophie's like, you have to get in with these girls, you have to be friends with these girls, you have to be more like these girls. And then she's seeing, for example, with the patois, she's seeing where these uptown girls, well, they can just go from standard English to patois and nobody's saying anything, but she can't do it. Why? It's so confusing, and it creates this sense of being off kilter for Pumpkin. So yeah, I never saw any of those things as jealousy. I kind of saw um, the other emotions behind them. And I guess if you think about it, that's what jealousy is, right? It does hide, just mask other emotions. Yeah. So that's an interesting question for me.
Well, a similar theme, really. I'm thinking about the scene towards the end of the novel, really, where the girls are outbreak and they're being told to go back to class. And the way that one of the classmates from one of these uptown girls responds to the teacher that Pumpkin has had all these entanglements with,
Yeah.
Pumpkin's like she could never have said that. And up
Yeah.
until that point, that relationship has been really antagonistic and important in the novel. But we've understood it, or let me speak for myself. I have understood that Pumpkin has perhaps been the instigator of it with some of the classism that she's inherited from her auntie. She's taken this kind of, she can't even speak English properly. Why would I learn French from her?
Yeah.
Right. So we understand it that Pumpkin's got a real issue and the teacher's responding. But in that moment, right towards the end, we're like, hang on a second, because Pumpkin's grown. She's kind of had all these experiences and she started to see the world a little bit differently. And we know that she doesn't hold the same prejudices in the way that she did at the start. Right. And we see that she's definitely being treated differentially. And I just wondered, why did you include that? Is that, and I'm trying not to answer the question before I ask it, but it felt like it was kind of a little nod to that. Like sometimes this is so imbued that it then gets reversed. It's kind of like a reverse classism almost. Or is there something else going on for you?
Yeah, I think for me, that this thing with the teacher, I think it was, yes, in a way it was, I don't want to say reverse classism, which sounds like reverse racism a little bit, but it's
Yeah,
like,
that's probably not the right term.
yeah. Yeah,
Something
but
like
it
she
is.
knows that she can pick on this student. Like she's, the same prejudice that Pumpkin is bringing to the classroom that makes her look down on the teacher. She's actually looking down on Pumpkin in the same way. Like it's just the same thing echoing. Perhaps I don't know.
Yeah, so it's almost like with the teacher can sense that Pumpkin doesn't quite belong to this set, right? So the teacher kind of feels like, yeah, I don't have to, the difference doesn't have to be there. And that's really something that I have seen, growing up in Jamaica, this idea of deference, like who people show different sort of types of respect based on how they look, based on their accent, based on their last name, based on what they're driving. Sometimes I've seen a literal switch when a person figures out, oh, this is so and so's niece, this is so and so's daughter. Or you open your mouth and oh, okay, she's uptown or he's uptown. You see like a switch. Or even nowadays, when a person is white, like white Jamaican, for example, sometimes I have seen that sort of switch. It's like people are looking for where to put you on the social scale and then responding accordingly. And I wanted to show, like, for the teacher, she kind of senses that. And so she feels like she can speak a little more like free, like more authoritatively as a teacher. But Pumpkin, who herself is questioning this idea of this the class and who can speak in which way, if Sophie is telling her she has to strive to be a certain type of way. And then here's a teacher who is supposed to be this figure of authority, this person who is supposed to be able to shape her mind, this person who's supposed to help to get her to France when that already seems like an impossible thing. She is also speaking, patois and dropping her H's or mispronouncing this or mispronouncing the French. And so Pumpkin also kind of feels like, well, I am I am better off. So why should I, according to Auntie Sophie, I am better off. So why am I listening to this person? Why am I supposed to accept what she's telling me? And she's a teenager as well, right? She's young. And when you're young and you feel like you can't talk to me because I know what I'm talking about, and you're looking for ways to establish your own sort of independence and your own voice. So that's kind of what came out for me in those scenes with the teacher and the ones where you have like, yeah, the uptown girls, and then the teacher is like, well, this person can talk to her like that, but then why I can't? And I know it sounds a little convoluted maybe when I'm explaining it, but in my head it was just so clear, this idea of like the steps on the social ladder and who can take one step up and who can take one step down and who has to like move to the side so the other person can pass. That's how I've kind of that's how I felt that this classist society exists in Jamaica, or in Kingston at least, sometimes. And I was trying to highlight that.
No, it came out beautifully. It's very subtly done. The way I think we're pulling it apart because we're kind of interested in the mechanics of it. But in the novel,
Yeah.
it's very seamless, and these little kind of exchanges really illustrate those points that you're making. So thank you.
One of the things when we were discussing the novel, one of the things that occurred to us was that we're not sure about it, but we think this novel may be in dialogue with other Caribbean novels. We
Hmm.
thought about, for example, some of the short stories of Olive Senior. We saw,
Mm.
yes, we saw similarities in the concerns of the novel, and the fact that this is a novel that it's a coming of age story. Olive
Hmm.
Senior she concentrates on children a lot
Hmm.
in her short stories. So we were wondering if you saw yourself as being in conversation with any other writer or with any other body of work or with the canon in general, the Caribbean
Hmm.
of English speaking Caribbean novel.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't think of it that way. And I don't know if I would be so bold as to put myself in the same category as like Olive Senior. Um, but I would love to think I'm just another voice in that in that canon, as you say. I think that we all have these stories in us, and we are storytellers. I mean, Jamaican people are just storytellers, Caribbean people are storytellers. And I'm so excited that more of the world is getting to hear about our stories. So I just, I'm happy to be included in this group of people whose Caribbean stories and Caribbean voices are going out into the world. I can't think of off the top of my head. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I haven't read Olive Senior since university, I think. So I can't even think off the top of my head, like, you know, who I would say, oh, it's comparing to this, but I definitely feel like I'm just one of the many voices, and it's exciting to be a part of it, exciting to tell a story um, like mine. And it was sort of my view of Jamaica. And yeah, I mean, it's exciting to me that you think it's in conversation with these authors. That's the best I could say about that, I think.
Okay. We'd love to know why you chose to write the novel from the perspective of a teenager. We touched on that a little bit. We talked about the fact that, a lot of what Pumpkin is going through, she's seeing it through the eyes of, a 13 to 15-year-old. And just love to hear why you chose to write it from a teenager's perspective and not an adult's perspective.
Yeah. Um, Firstly, I didn't choose to write from a, I didn't, Pumpkin popped up into my head and then harassed me until I started to write the story. Like she just wouldn't leave me be. And I, when I started writing, it was a younger voice. And it's only sort of afterwards, in kind of thinking after the story is done, after I'm finished writing and I'm sort of soaking in it, that I think the reason that she came out as a young person is because it's this opportunity to see the world around you and have it impact you in a really significant way, to find yourself. For me, Pumpkin, I really believe Pumpkin is my inner child. And there's a lot of things that she learned in her journey. In she started out at, I think, 11, and then ended when she was about 16. That it took me until, I think, age 40 to learn. And sometimes I feel jealous of her, like, oh, she got it so young. And it's things like, knowing yourself, being secure in yourself, being happy with who you are, realizing that no matter where you are, there you are. It's not, when you're not running away from, you can't run away from yourself. um, I love that Pumpkin finds a sense of community, in Boots and in Tamara and Mandy and her friends and all these Miss Keen, all these people who show up for her. And I think that people rally around young people in a different way. Like they want to help them, they want to support them because they see this opportunity for, growth and development, and for them to really be better and to make some sort of impact, in the world. So I think she came out young just because, yeah, it's just an opportunity to kind of be shaped by the world around her in a way that when you're older, you're obviously still affected and impacted by your environment. But I think those changes can be like really incremental. Whereas I think with a young person whose brain is so malleable, whose soul is like a sponge, you can see these greater leaps into maturity. And also, I feel like if women, if girls develop that sense of self much younger, I feel like a lot of us come into our own in our 30s, in our 40s. And if we did that in our youth, like in our teens, in our 20s, we would be unstoppable. So I love the idea of this young person already kind of knowing. Obviously, she has to go through life, she has to have her experiences, but starting with a leg up, starting by knowing, like, I know where I'm supposed to be. I don't have to rush. I don't have to do something because my Auntie Sophie wants me to do it, or my mother wants me to do it, or my grandmother wants me to do it. I understand. I have a feeling for what is good for me. I'm going to do that. I just love the idea of it. I wish more girls would reach that point earlier in life, because we would truly, truly rule the world, I believe, if that were the case. So, since the world isn't like that yet, I just created it in my own world.
That was so beautifully put. And I think that's one of the things I really loved about the novel. It's the way that people show up for her in her moment of need, and when she needs them to. She's
Mhm.
and it's such a powerful thing when she's able to say to her mother, people are gonna look for me. Like it's
Yes,
such a statement that like you can do what you want, but I'm not alone in this world. And just because we
yes,
have this abusive and terrible relationship doesn't mean. And I think I'm not a product of of a family like that, but I can only hope that a child that was in that sort of situation could take hope from your novel. That
mhm,
people will show up, and yeah, sorry, got off track, but no, it was just it's such a powerful thing because your novel for me, as well as the kind of authors that Paula mentioned, also reminded me of, I don't know if you know Jacqueline Wilson.
I don't think so.
So she's a British author, and she wrote. I think she's still writing, but she almost exclusively writes stories from children about children in difficult
Hmm.
situations in foster care,
Mm,
whose parents have divorced and they're moving around in poverty, and they're always these really plucky characters in some
hmm.
kind of situation that that most children's writers don't write about because it's not fun, it's not cool. But she gives them such life. And one of the most popular kind of kids' TV shows is about this character, Tracy Beaker, who shared a birthday with me and was like one of my favorite
Mm,
characters as a kid. He was a kid growing up in foster care and she's trying to be adopted before she's too old and ages out of the system.
yeah.
And your novel for me actually really reminded me of those, like a Caribbean take on a, or a Caribbean
Hmm.
take on Kathleen Wilson, which I know we don't do. It's not like a Caribbean version. Like, this is not a question. Okay, so one of the things that it's a comment. It's okay. I can make a comment, right? But yeah, it's one of the things I really really liked about the novel, that you taken this kind of unusual, difficult situation to write about and to tell it from the point of view of a child. I wondered if you thought some of that kind of work of making it a child's story of her own abuse while she's going through it. It's not an adult memoir talking about this terrible story from maximum effect, kind of dramatically speaking, but it's a child trying to survive it. And I wondered, does that lend itself to a more lighthearted tone? Do you think does it make it naturally a more hopeful style, if you like, or genre? Is that the right word, genre?
You mean by writing it from a young person's perspective makes it easier?
It makes, because your novel's not, it's not hard to read. It's a joy and a pleasure, and
Mm,
it's a very hopeful book. But it's actually telling a
mhm.
real story of neglect and pain and abuse
Yeah.
and generational trauma and all sorts of
Mm,
terrible things. So I wondered, if is it because you tell it's from the point of view of a child who is experiencing it and who we hope will get through it okay, that it therefore
mm.
lends itself to being a much more hopeful read of that exact same terrible situation.
I mean, oh, I that could be because, children, I don't know, like, people say children are resilient, but I don't, that stuff comes out later. So I don't know, I don't know how resilient children really are, because just because it doesn't come out immediately, it's gonna come out later. I think for me, what was really important was, um, I wanted to tell a story that was real. So this is not a memoir. I also do not come from this sort of family. My parents are amazing. I was not abused or anything like that. Just want to be clear that my mother is amazing. Because people keep asking me, how is your mother? And I'm like, it's not my mother. Um, but there's so much of this kind of neglect and this kind of abuse, um, physical neglect and emotional neglect, that goes on in the Caribbean. And people just think it is very normal. Um, this idea of you're going to get beaten, if you do under this or you do that, you're going to get beaten. Like, that's very normal in the Caribbean. And people make jokes about it all the time, about your mother going to get the belt or the slippers, or like, if you tell people this, like, foreigners, they're aghast, and for us it's like a joke, or things that people, parents say, stop crying before I give you something to cry about. So you're already crying. You already have something to cry about, and they're like, I'm going to put more pain on top of that to make sure, you know what I mean. These are very, they might sound small, but these are also ways that we are hurting our children. We're not allowing them to feel emotion, not allowing them to learn how to move through their emotions. Um, we are, instead of trying to understand them or reason with them, we're just beating them. And obviously, I don't mean every single person in the Caribbean. No, not every family is like this. But just culturally, this is very familiar to all of us. And then, of course, it goes in to different degrees. I think Pumpkin's situation is quite serious, but also not the worst that happens. And the fact is that there are a lot of children who are taking care of themselves. There's a lot of children who have to grow up a little bit too fast in Jamaica. There's a lot of children who have to be making their own lunch or making their own way to school, or they send them to work, or they're not allowed to have childhoods. Um, and this is reality. At the same time, I personally do not enjoy reading hard books. It's too painful. I know that things are real, but that's also what makes it difficult to read for me. The pain of it is too much for me. I feel overwhelmed. I feel this sense of injustice. I cannot stand it. I hate that it happens. But I also don't want to turn a blind eye to it. So I know that there are a lot of kids in these situations, but there are a lot of kids who make it through. They make it out, they find their way, they excel, they push through. And I think particularly Caribbean people, we do really well. You know, when we put our minds to it, like we do well. So I wanted to have a book that, even though it touched on these realities, it had a sense of hope and it had a sense of joy, had a sense of fun still. Like she still had like a childhood, even though she was like working, selling her baked goods and stuff, and had to make all these adult decisions. And she still had a sense of joy and hope. It's important for me when reading books, especially Black books, books about Black characters. I don't want to only read about Black pain. I want to read about Black joy as well. So I don't know if it was because she was, a child. I feel like even if I had written a book from an adult perspective, I would want to have that sense of levity, a sense of joy, a sense of hopefulness, a taste of, Jamaica, so that people felt not just the hardship, but just also just a full life. Because even if a person is experiencing hardship, I feel there are always moments of pleasure and of joy to experience.
I want to ask you a hard question.
Oh my gosh.
Hard, won't be all that hard. You come from a background of relative privilege in Jamaica. Did you have any concerns about writing a novel about someone who didn't enjoy your privileges? Um, yeah, that
Yeah,
basically is it.
it's a good question. And when I was writing the novel, no. But when it was done and it was going out in the world, I was like, oh. I expected so many people to ask me about that. And you are actually the first person to ask me about that. I was concerned, um, in a way that people would say, well, how would you know, basically? Um, but the reason that I wrote from this perspective, honestly, I felt a great deal of shame when I left Jamaica. When I left Jamaica for the like final time, I was 23, and everyone that I grew up with was in a similar or better situation than I was. And it wasn't until I left Jamaica and I went to live in Canada, and then I went to live in Rome, and I live in all these countries that don't have this very strict social, like they don't even understand it. Like the majority of people are in kind of a similar situation. And it was in sort of talking about my life, thinking about my life, looking back, that I started to see a lot of inequalities and a lot of unfairness. And I grew up in such a bubble, and didn't, I cannot say I didn't see it, but maybe I didn't recognize it in some way. Like I saw it, like I knew it was going on, but it was almost like, well, it doesn't have anything to do with me, so I don't know, what do I do? I wasn't thinking about it in that way. And when I left and I started to think about it, I felt a great deal of shame about that. I really did. I felt like, who are you really? Just because you were lucky enough not to be born in that situation, because it's only luck, to kind of close your eyes to it. And there's a particular scene in the book that I feel encapsulates that like perfectly for me. So when Mandy was going to visit Pumpkin at her house, and they went on the bus, and Mandy was on the bus for the first time. And when Mandy is experiencing this thing for the first time, and she's sort of like shutting down, and she's like, what is going on? And she's starting to feel a bit nervous. And that was me. When I was 14, I went on a Jamaican bus for the first time. And I was also like, oh, I don't know about this. And I remember years later, years after I'd left, I was, for some reason, I was thinking about that, and I was like, what was wrong with you? what is really wrof with you? Like, it's a bus. This is how people live. This is how people go to work. And I felt really ashamed. And so in that scene, you have Mandy who's feeling this, way. And then you have Pumpkin who is having this sort of argument in her head, like really, lady, where you come from, really? You live in this country and you're gonna act like that because you're on a bus, So I'm literally at war with myself in this scene. I am both characters at the same time. So I recognized that no, I did not live through, Pumpkin's experiences. I didn't live where Pumpkin lived. But I know that it existed and I know that it was happening. And this is a way for me to turn my eyes to it instead of turning away from it. I wanted to show a full picture of Jamaica. When I started to write this book, it was because I was so incredibly homesick. I was so homesick and I couldn't, even when I went to visit, it wouldn't quench the thirst for me. It was this, I was homesick for this very particular time and space. And I started to write from that perspective, but all of this started to come out because I said I could not write from this rose colored perspective. If I'm going to write the story, I have to write a full picture of Jamaica, even the Jamaica that I did not recognize while I was there, but I recognize it now. I see it now. I understand now the unfairness. I understand now the disparity. And I want to show that it still exists and how it affects people. So that's how I sort of, yes, I was concerned at first about, okay, people are going to say, but this is the true feeling of that I have about why I wrote it in this way and why I chose this perspective. And it was almost like I got to, in a way, I got like a do-over a little bit to say, okay, I hear you now, I see you now, I get it.
So you mentioned that you were longing for a particular space and time, and is that why you chose to set the novel in the 90s, or was there some
Yes.
other reason?
No, 100%. The 90s is the best time in Jamaica. The best music ever. The best. I feel like even the food, because I went back recently and my dad was telling me they don't make the jerk so hot anymore because people were complaining, and I was like, "What?" Like, jerk used to make you ball, and now they're like, and I don't know. It was just in the 90s. I was a teenager in the 90s, and it was just the best time. You're in this stage where you're growing up. You're not yet an adult, but you're not a kid anymore, and you have more freedom, but you still have the protection of your parents in a way, and your friends. You have these friend groups. I don't think people roll with groups like that, after you hit 30. People don't have time anymore. They do, okay, maybe it's just me. But then, yeah, I just felt like I had my crew, and I just missed that time. I just missed it. It was just such a great time of just, I remember being 16 and just being in love with Jamaica. I just remember, I always knew I was going to go somewhere else. I always wanted to travel. I always wanted to live in Europe. So I knew I was going to leave. But I remember at that point being like, oh, I love this place. There's nowhere else I would have rather grown up ever. And I just wanted to go back there one more time. So that's what I did. Yeah. And it cured the homesickness. So that was good.
I'm gonna push a little bit on the same kind of area. Just
Mm.
thinking about your homesickness, and I wondered if that plays a little bit into the character of Boots, because I think I was
Mm.
like, Boots is a wonderful character. Let's be clear, like we love Boots, right? We all fell in love with
Yeah.
Boots. Who couldn't? We're not monsters. Just the best guy ever. But is he too good? Like is it because he's so perfect, right? He's just this perfect guy.
Mm.
He doesn't express his hurt and his anger, even though he's been mistreated. He's pitying the person that's mistreated him, that he kind of led him on. Um, and yeah, does that make him sort of? I'm just wondering if, as part of your homesickness, you create this kind of ideal character who's
Mm.
almost emasculated by his perfectness. But emasculation is such a strong word. Maybe that's a bit of an overstretch.
Yeah.
But do you know what I mean? Like, is he too perfect? And is that because you're in this space of kind of, you said you didn't want to roast him, but is Boots a bit of roast hinting? Or is he just that great?
No, Boots is the character of Boots is based on my Uncle Shoes and Uncle Shoesy, we call him. And he was a friend of my dad's and my mom, but he went to school with my dad. And he was part of my life growing up. And he was the sweetest man on earth. And he never got upset. And he was just always chill. He was just always happy. And he formed the base. He is not Boots, but he formed the basis of Boots. But for me, Boots is a voice of reason. I don't think Boots is perfect. I just think Boots is emotionally mature. I think that um, it takes a real strength of character to express how you feel and then to accept an answer that you don't like. So he wants to move things further with Sophie. She doesn't want to. To accept that with grace takes strength as opposed to getting angry about it. Um, to be, you mentioned emasculation, and yeah, I think there's this idea in the Caribbean of like the of masculinity, which is aggression and I'm going to get angry and Boost doesn't need to do that because he's so secure in who he is as a person. He knows his value, he knows his worth, and he sees also why Sophie is responding in the way that she does. And that doesn't make it any less painful. But what's the point of getting upset? She's a part of a system and she's responding to this system that is in place. And he's getting upset is not going to change anything. And as a matter of fact, I think that kind of highlights like what she really missed out on. And what I love about Boots is that even though things didn't work out with Sophie, and because he had absolutely no reason to, he still showed up to support Pumpkin. And that was really important to me because of Akil, who we all know is a waste man, and nobody don't like Akil. Everybody hates Akil. And Akil is, for me, also like a very kind of stereotypical Jamaican. Um, just kind of just living his life, doing what he wants to do. You have these Jamaican guys who say, "Yeah, man, I have six youth, man, I have six children," and do they support any of that? No, no. They just like to say they have all these kids because it shows that they are virile, they are men, um, and that is a stereotype. It's a stereotype for a reason, but I wanted to show that it's not the only type of man who exists in Jamaica. That's not the only type of Jamaican men. There are Jamaican men who take responsibility. There are Jamaican men who are emotionally mature. There are Jamaican men who support. And I think for the fact that he didn't have to do it, it's not his kid. It's not even his girlfriend's kid. He just sees this is a kid who needs my help. And I don't know, maybe that makes him. I didn't try to write him as perfect. I more wrote him as like a Greek chorus in a way. It's almost like he's helping people like, to understand this is the system. This is the system in Jamaica. This is what people are working through. This is why this is happening. Just to kind of make it clear. But I just want the best for him. So yeah, there was. I mean, what flaw could I give Boots?
No, he definitely gets his happy ending. You done him fine.
Issue, this is a character driven novel. And so I
Mm.
want to ask you a general question. Which of the characters did you find most difficult to construct and why?
Ooh, which was more difficult to construct? Um, I think maybe Paulette, because Paulette is complicated. Paulette is not a good person, and she treats her daughter horribly. and she's obsessed with Akil. But why does she do all these things? Um, I wanted to make sure that funny that this kind of follows up on the boots question, but I didn't want a two-dimensional villain. A mother that is just all bad, because I just don't think that that exists really in humanity. I think there's always something that you can find in a person that is either redeeming or at least creates this understanding of why they are the way they are. So Paulette, for me, I wanted to explore, like, why does she do these things? Why does she act this way? Paulette is starved of love and attention from the person who is supposed to give her love and attention. And she lives in a house where she can see someone else, her own flesh and blood, receiving something that she doesn't get any part of. And then she creates this new human being. And these people, Cecile and Auntie Sophie, just absorb her child into their world. And she just has to kind of stand by and see this. But it's the only thing she has even a slight control over. So she's digging in her heels about, like, what Pumpkin can and cannot do. But at the same time, she doesn't know how to love Pumpkin. She doesn't know how to give her attention. She doesn't know. All she sees is this child who is more aligned with her aunt, but she cannot see how her, Paulette's behavior also helps to push her in that direction, to push Pumpkin in that direction. She's running after Akil because Akil gave her some attention one time. And so she wants to get that back. And it feels easier to try and get the attention of a man than to get the attention of her mother or her sister or her daughter, because that's a completely different type of love and a different type of attention. And she's a product of, again, this colonialist, classist, colorist society that is telling her that because she is some shades darker than her own sister, that she is of less value. So I think to present all of that in this character definitely was a challenge. It definitely took some thought, and I wanted to make her nuanced. So a lot of people, they don't like Paulette, but they feel sad for her. They feel badly for Paulette. People have written me that Paulette needs Jesus. Paulette needs therapy. Paulette needs, like, and it's true. Paulette needs help. Paulette needs. I also feel really bad for Paulette. So yeah, that was definitely the most challenging character, to make that like a full, balanced, nuanced character who is definitely a villain, but whose villainy you kind of understand.
Actually, we'd love to know if there's going to be a sequel to Pumpkin. Are we going to meet Pumpkin again as a grown up, or
I won't say I won't say no unequivocally, but I don't have any plans to write a sequel. Right now, I feel like Pumpkin needs to live. I think she needs to live a life. I think she needs to go through some experiences. I think she needs to explore who she is, and maybe years from now she might knock back on my skull and be like, "All right, I have some more. I have some other story to tell." But yeah, and I don't have direct plans to. I feel like her story, in a way, it's just beginning in a way, but also it's very settled right now in this time, and I kind of want to leave that there and leave space. But I won't say that I never will, because yeah, maybe she will come back to me.
Let me just ask you one quick question because we're running out
Mm,
of time. You use some proverbs, you use Jamaican
mm.
proverbs at the beginning of several chapters, most of them, if I recall correctly. Why?
Because I think they're really cool. I love Jamaican sayings. We have a saying for everything. There is nothing in life for which a Jamaican don't have a saying. And I wanted to introduce these sections. And at first, I was just going, part one, part two, and I was like, well, that's boring. And then I don't know. I don't know how I got the idea, but I just thought, like, oh, but if I could find a Jamaican saying that sort of encompasses the idea of what is coming in the next chapter or in the next section that might be interesting. And I roped in my dad. I'm like, Daddy, I need a thing that talks about like when X, Y, and Z kind of happens. And then he went to like Amina Blackwood Meeks, and he went to this other person, and everybody kind of pulled together to help me because I didn't know a lot of them on just off the top of my head. But I just think we have the most interesting ways of expressing ourselves and of saying things. And I don't really see those things around, those proverbs. I don't really see them around anymore. I don't know how much we're using them anymore. So it's almost like a way of preserving them in a way, and also like sharing that um, with international readers as well, so they can get learn a little bit more about like how we speak and like how we say things, our turns of phrase. I just think it's a really interesting way of expressing ourselves that we have. So I wanted to just incorporate that.
Thank you so much, Ishi. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you, everyone who has joined us for this program, for joining us. The next time you see us, we'll be discussing this novel. I hope you can see it, Ibis by Justin Haynes. So, see you later. Bye bye.